If you follow me on my Letterboxd account, link in the notes, you already know that I'm a big fan of monster movies. When done right, it's some of the most fun I have while watching films. And with Godzilla vs Kong coming out next week, we wanted to try our hand at a massive monster of our own. For this test scene specifically, Josh was directing, and we are often in different locations. So the first thing we decided to do was land on a tone for the piece. I won't go into that here on how we come to that conclusion, since we did cover that in detail last week, where I talk about the 3 things that we always do in pre-production to lock in our vision for a project, including where you can go to get all kinds of high quality film stills for free. So link in the notes for that as well. But once we locked in our style, we decided to go with our SLR Magic anamorphic lenses and our Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro. If we didn't have the anamorphic lenses, we of course could just go spherical and throw bars on in the end, but we have them, so why not? And overall, we wanted to stay very minimal with our lighting, just using 2 or 3 lights on every shot, starting with our outside establishing shot. For this, we had 1 light in the back helping to bring up this orange light from our practical, another pushing a bit more moonlight on this other side here, and finally, a 2-foot Nanlite held above the swings to bring them out a bit more. The Pocket 6K Pro definitely does really well in these low light situations like this, so that helped us out a lot as well. And we did a review on this camera, so if you do want to dive into our thoughts on that a lot more, link again in the notes. Now inside, the idea was to kind of revolve all the motivated light around our television. So for this front shot of Emily here, we had our Aputure Nova P300C with the softbox on, and we dialed that to a cool tone and then just had an object moving in front of the light to create this slight flickering. This light does have a TV mode, but it felt pretty artificial to us for what we were doing here. To edge her slightly here, we have that 2-foot Nanlite again above and behind, set to 2900 Kelvin, just to get a nice warmish reddish hit there. And that's pretty much how we handled every shot inside, those 2 lights serving those functions in slightly different ways depending on what our angle was. We did have a Nanlite Forza 60 for this shot here where she looks to the side. We had the dome on and angled it up a bit so that the light cut off the bottom half of her face. It gave us a nice stylized feel that we dug, a nice contrast too, pulling you toward her eyes. And in each of these shots, we really focused on finding good eye light, making sure we have that little spark in the actor's eyes go a long way to breathe life into each shot. But all of this, of course, is leading toward the whole reason for this test scene. So let's jump right into that. For this one, we shot an empty plate of the tree line during a gray day with a little tilt up movement for the reveal. In the end, shooting these 2 things separately did add some issues with connecting the 2 shots in the edit, Emily's and the POV. So I cooled off this side of Emily's shot and her face to try to connect them more visually. Then we had the roar start in a bit early, had her react, and this does help us tie those 2 shots together that really don't connect perfectly. One of the reasons that we shot them separately like this was so we could shoot this one during the day. It allowed us to use a luma key to separate the trees later, which we wouldn't be able to do if we shot this at night like the rest of the scene. But now in After Effects, we're going to drop in our footage into a new comp, and the first thing that we want to do is to track our camera's movement. So we're going to right click the layer, track and stabilize, track camera, and once it's tracked, we're going to go through to see if the points looked fixed in place. This looks good, though every piece of footage can get different results. We're going to choose a point where it looks like a good track, then right click and create null and camera. Now to darken the footage, we'll add a tint to lower the saturation a bit and a curves effect to really crush the brights and give it more of a foggy evening look. For the monster character, we're going to be using Video Copilot's Element 3D. So to start, we're going to create a new solid layer above our footage and then apply Element 3D. You can find hundreds of monster 3D models available online with different levels of quality and a variety of prices. We decided to go with this creature on CG Trader, and this specific model was designed for 3D printing. So we had to open it up in Blender to delete these different areas so that we just had the character solo. We also went into sculpt mode and redesigned the face slightly to get a bit more of a feel that felt like Godzilla and less Rancor-ish. If you do this, you're going to want to export it as an OBJ so we can then import it back in Element 3D. Check normalize size if it appears too small, or you can also change the scale. Because this model has no materials, we used one from Pro Shaders 2 called Groundstone 5. If your model looks like a flat color, try changing the texture mapping down from UV to another option such as box. You can also alter the repeat to change the material scale. We also changed the normal normal bump to make it feel more scaly. You'll also want to change your environment map if it feels too bright for a low lit shot like this one. But back in After Effects, the model will now be in your camera track scene, but you will likely need to scale and reposition. In Group 1, Particle Look, you can change the particle size, as well as in the World Transform settings, you can change your world scale, position, and rotation. So alter these until you get an angle and a scale that feels like it works well within the scene and your framing. We also want to give our monster some movement, but you can't animate specific parts of a character like this in Element. You can try Mixamo, which we have shown before, but sometimes if a model is too far away from a typical skeleton, the upload can fail. However, we found that animating Element's deform options can be a good trick to give a character some movement. We'll enable the bend option, which, as you can see, when you alter these different values, they deform the model in various ways, almost like a 3D turbulent displacement. So we'll set bend axis to Y, and at the start of our timeline, keyframe bend angle set to 50. Orientation X and Y, and change orientation Z to -24. Although you don't need to follow these exact values, just try it by eye until you like the results. Then move to the end of the timeline and change each of these keyframe values to give us an end pose. When you play through, you'll see your model animating. Now we're going to get into actually matching the shot more to our scene, but before we do, I want to thank today's sponsor, which is Artgrid. We've talked about Artgrid plenty. Their stuff is really cinematic, and I've been using them for years. And last week, I talked about building your creative vision, and Artgrid is another great resource for that, building out tone reels and rip reels for pitches. But this takes it to another level. Since you're using shots that aren't immediately recognizable, it allows you to create something that feels a lot more unique. It's a great place for stock footage that's shot by actual filmmakers too. It's all nicely curated, making it easy to find exactly what you need, and in a wide range of formats and 3 pricing tiers to choose from, each with unlimited license. This gives you free usage for any private and commercial production for every platform worldwide, full access to everything in the Artgrid library, and of course, all the footage is royalty free. New material is added daily, all again from filmmakers, all high quality cinematic work. And if you subscribe through our link in the notes below, you can get 2 months free and a free VFX pack. Their VFX pack comes with a bunch of compositing assets, including smoke, fire, rain, dust, and fog. These assets are perfect for shots like the one we're doing today. Adding a little something extra like atmosphere goes a really long way to bring your shot to life. So again, check the links in the notes below to get 2 months free and a free VFX pack. But let's jump back in and work on matching to our scene more. For that, we're going to go into render settings and dial up the environment lighting influence. Under lighting, you can choose from a variety of light presets, so go through to see which ones you like. We chose 360, changed the rotation, then lowered the brightness, then enabled ambient occlusion with a high intensity. Next, we're going to use a curves effect to flatten the contrast a bit to match that foggy scene of the background. And since our monster is larger and further away than the trees, it won't be as dark. We can also lower the layer's opacity since we have a neutral sky with little detail to be seen through the monster. To add the trees in the foreground, duplicate the background footage and then move it above the monster. And we're going to want to turn the sky completely white to then use for blending and matting. Since our sky has some darker blue areas, we'll first use a hue and saturation effect set to the blues and expand the section, then turn down saturation and boost brightness to make it more even with the rest of the sky. Next, add a tint effect to make it black and white. Then lastly, a curves to lift the brightness and add some contrast. Changing the blending mode to multiply will get rid of any white areas so we can see the monster and sky again, but we keep the branches in the foreground. To bring back some detail though, we can duplicate this layer 2 more times and switch blending mode back to normal. For the top duplicate, add another curves effect to crush the blacks and then a luma key set to key out brighter. If we solo the layer, you can see how much of the frame the effect keys out. We want the key to be pretty tight to the branches and can add a subtle feather too. This layer can now be used as an alpha matte for the duplicate below. Select both layers, right click the pre-comp so that we can apply effects to this new new tree alpha layer later. Change the blending mode to screen, and you can use curves to add contrast depending on how bright or close to silhouette you want the trees. A subtle blur can also help if there's any aliasing with a thin branches detail. We'll now use an adjustment layer to make the whole scene darker and match our scene just by using a few curves effects, lowering brightness, and then one to add more of a nighttime blue tone. Obviously, this is very dark and obscure like a lot of the scenes, not only in Godzilla movies, but with a variety of monster films. One thing that really helps this, though, is the use of flashing light, such as lightning or electrical flashes, for example. It's a great way to add quick bursts of details to something that you want to stay mostly hidden to try to make as convincing as possible, or just to use as a great reveal. Since we're outside with a sky filling a lot of our frame, we opted to go with lightning. A quick way to do this is to duplicate your background footage and set blending to screen. Change the existing curves effect to something with a lot more contrast and change tint to 100, then mask out an area of the sky where you want the flashing to occur with a lot of feathering. Trim this layer to begin at whichever frame you want, then move forward a few frames and trim the end so that it only appears for a few frames. To give some animation, you can add a new curves effect and set a keyframe. Then alter it slightly on each frame so that it has a bit of a flicker. For the light to fall on the monster, add a light into the comp, and we are using a point light for this. Then you're going to want to increase the intensity and move the light to the position that the lightning is coming from. You can also use multiple lights to hit different areas if needed. We ended up with 2 point lights and 1 spotlight. The benefit of a spotlight is you can focus the light at just one area if needed, such as the face. Keyframe the intensity on each light at the frame where the light begins, and then keyframe the intensity to 0 when the lightning ends to have it flash on and off. If you want the light to also hit the trees, you can add a light sweep effect, which is kind of like a bevel emboss, adding a brightness to an alpha edge and allowing you to change angle and width. You'll only want this to be subtle though, and remember to keyframe the intensity on and off to match the lighting. We also found adding some volumetric spotlights from below helped create some subtle separation between the monster and trees. These could be from a building below or actual spotlights being aimed up. These were made just using solids with a small mask and a fractal noise effect, then a radial fast blur set to 100. The fractal noise can control how much detail and sharpness you want the light rays to have, and we keyframed them to brighter during the lightning flash. Just know that if you set a 2D layer to 3D, it might go dark or invisible. This happens when there are lights in your scene. To fix this, just go into the material options and switch off accept shadows and lights. Lastly, we added an adjustment layer with a glow effect and then a final grade over everything. And if you want your lightning to change locations like ours did, you can duplicate the lightning layer, trim it to a different area in the timeline, and change the mask location. Then duplicate your lights, move the intensity keyframes to match the new timing, and change the positions to match the new lightning area. You can also add things to the mouth, such as smokestack footage to look like steam or vapor, or we also masked an area with a red tone to add some color variation. And if you were going for a different type of look for your scene, such as these Godzilla shots, you can quickly change this by adding a warm solid with a feathered mask behind the trees, add a warm colored light from a similar direction to match, and then change your grade to match these fiery colors to give a more destroyed city style to your scene. There's a lot of customizing that can be done and different 3D models that can change the feel of the scene too. It can even work for a building instead, such as a haunted castle. So you could take these ideas and apply them to whatever scene you're trying to produce. It doesn't have to be a monster or living creature. It can be an inanimate object if you want. Just take the general concept and run with it. Again, links to everything we talked about in the notes below, including links to Artgrid for the 2 months and the VFX pack. Of course, if you're not subscribed, consider doing so and hit the bell if you are so you can be notified about all our new content. And until next time, don't forget to write, shoot, edit, repeat.